Emma lost everything for a single act of kindness. When she served a man everyone ignored, the manager humiliated and fired her in front of the whole diner. But the stranger in the worn jacket wasn't who he appeared to be, and what he did the very next day left the entire town speechless forever. The morning sun poured through the wide windows of Rosie's diner, like honey dripping from a spoon, casting golden light across the checkered floor that had witnessed 1,000 stories over the past 50 years. The chrome stools along the counter gleamed with the dedication of daily polishing, and the red vinyl booths held the comfortable wear of countless families who had made this place their second home. Emma Caldwell moved between the tables with the practiced grace of someone who had learned to carry 3 plates on one arm while refilling coffee cups with the other. At 26 years old, she had been working at Rosie's for nearly 4 years now, ever since her husband had walked out on her and their baby daughter, leaving behind nothing but a stack of unpaid bills and a note that said he needed to find himself. She had found herself instead, found herself standing in the doorway of their empty apartment with a crying infant in her arms and exactly $47 in her checking account, found herself walking into Rosie's the very next morning, begging for any position they had available. Old Rosie herself, God rest her soul, had taken one look at Emma's desperate eyes and handed her an apron without asking a single question. "Order up, Emma," called out Marcus from the kitchen window, his dark hands sliding 2 plates of the breakfast special onto the warming shelf. He was a mountain of a man with a voice that could rattle windows, but his eyes always softened when he looked at the young waitress who never complained, never called in sick, and never forgot to save him a slice of whatever pie they were serving that day. "Coming right up," Emma called back, tucking a strand of honey-brown hair behind her ear before grabbing the plates. Table 7 was waiting, a pair of regulars named Harold and Betty, who had been coming every Tuesday morning for their entire 42-year marriage. Emma knew their order by heart. 2 eggs over easy for Harold, scrambled with cheese for Betty, extra bacon for both, and 2 cups of decaf that she kept refilled without being asked. "Here you go, lovebirds," Emma said with a warm smile as she set down their plates. Betty laughed, the sound like wind chimes on a summer porch, and Harold pretended to be embarrassed even though everyone could see the way his eyes still lit up when he looked at his wife. "Emma, dear, how's that beautiful little girl of yours?" Betty asked, reaching out to pat Emma's hand with fingers gnarled by arthritis but gentle as a grandmother's touch. "Lily's doing wonderfully, Mrs. Patterson. She lost her first tooth last week and nearly called the police when the tooth fairy didn't show up right away." Emma laughed at the memory, though the truth was she had been so exhausted from working a double shift that she had fallen asleep before remembering to slip $1 under Lily's pillow. She had woken at 3 in the morning in a panic, heart racing, and crept into her daughter's room like a thief in reverse. "You're doing a fine job raising that child on your own," Harold said gruffly, the kind of man who showed affection through practical observations rather than flowery words. Not many young people today have that kind of grit. Emma felt warmth spread through her chest at his words. These small moments of kindness from the regulars were what kept her going on the hard days, when her feet ached and her back screamed, and she wanted nothing more than to crawl into bed and sleep for 100 years. But there was always Lily to think about, always the rent that was due, always the dream she carried like a precious secret in her heart. One more semester, just one more semester of nursing school, and she would finally have her degree. 4 years of night classes after exhausting shifts, of studying textbooks while Lily slept, of sacrificing everything that resembled a social life. Her mother Ruth watched Lily in the evenings. Bless her heart, even though Ruth's own health was failing and she really should have been the one being cared for, instead of the other way around. The bell above the door chimed, and Emma looked up automatically, her welcoming smile already in place. It faltered slightly when she saw who walked in. Victoria Ashford moved through the diner like a shark through shallow waters, her high heels clicking against the checkered floor with the precision of a metronome. At 30 years old, she carried herself with the rigid posture of someone who had clawed her way up from a regional manager position at a fast food chain to become the district supervisor for the Comfort Foods Corporation, the faceless company that had purchased Rosie's diner 3 years ago after old Rosie passed away. Victoria's dark hair was pulled back in a bun so tight it seemed to stretch her face, and her charcoal suit probably cost more than Emma made in 2 months. She carried a clipboard like a weapon, her cold eyes scanning the diner with the calculating gaze of someone who saw numbers instead of people. "Staff meeting in 5 minutes," Victoria announced, her voice cutting through the comfortable murmur of breakfast conversation like a blade. Everyone, no exceptions. Emma exchanged a worried glance with Sandra, another waitress who had been at Rosie's even longer than Emma had. Sandra was 53, with grown children and a husband on disability, and she relied on this job as much as Emma did. Her eyes held the same fear that Emma felt settling in her stomach like a stone. They gathered in the small break room behind the kitchen, the 4 waitresses, Marcus the cook, and young Tommy who washed dishes and bussed tables. Victoria stood before them like a general addressing troops she found disappointing. "Corporate has reviewed the numbers from this location," Victoria began, her eyes fixed on her clipboard as though she couldn't bear to look at them directly. "Profit margins are down 7% from last quarter. This is unacceptable." Emma thought about the construction on Main Street that had been blocking traffic for months, the new chain restaurant that had opened 2 blocks away with its flashy advertising and cheap lunch specials. But she said nothing. She had learned early on that Victoria didn't appreciate explanations she hadn't asked for. "Effective immediately. There will be changes," Victoria continued. "No more free refills on anything except water. No more employee meals at discount. And I want to see a 15% increase in table turnover. If a customer is lingering without ordering more, move them along." Sandra shifted uncomfortably. "Ma'am, some of our regulars have been coming here for decades. They come as much for the company as the food. If we start rushing them out, then they can find company elsewhere." Victoria cut her off sharply. "This is a business, not a community center. Our job is to generate profit, not friendships." She paused, her eyes sweeping across them with barely concealed disdain. "I'll be spending the day here observing operations. I expect everyone to be at their absolute best. Any infractions will be dealt with immediately." With that, she turned on her heel and strode back into the diner, leaving behind a cloud of expensive perfume and an atmosphere of dread. "Well," Marcus muttered, his deep voice barely above a whisper, "reckon we better get back to making money for the Queen." Despite the tension, Emma almost smiled, but the knot in her stomach wouldn't quite allow it. The lunch rush came and went with Victoria watching everything from a corner booth, making notes on her clipboard that seemed to grow longer by the hour. Emma worked harder than ever, forcing her smile to stay bright even as her anxiety grew. She needed this job, desperately. Without it, there would be no nursing school, no better future for Lily, no money for her mother's medication. It was just past 2 o'clock when the door chimed again, and a man walked in that Emma had never seen before. He was young, maybe her own age, with brown hair that looked like it hadn't been properly combed in days and stubble shadowing his jaw. He wore a faded green jacket that had seen better years, work boots caked with what looked like dried mud, and jeans worn thin at the knees. His hands were rough, the hands of someone who worked with them for a living, and there was something in his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and heavy burdens. He hesitated just inside the door, looking around the diner with the uncertain expression of someone who wasn't sure if he belonged there. Emma recognized that look. She had worn it herself once upon a time. Before Emma could move to greet him, Victoria appeared at her elbow, her voice a sharp hiss in Emma's ear. "Don't bother with that one." "Excuse me." "Look at him." Victoria's lip curled with distaste. "Probably can't afford more than a cup of coffee, if that. People like that take up tables for hours and never tip. Don't waste your time." Emma felt something cold settle in her chest. "He's a customer. He walked through our door. He's not the kind of customer we want." Victoria's eyes were hard as granite. "Let him figure out on his own that he's not welcome. He'll leave eventually." Victoria walked away, leaving Emma standing there with a war raging inside her. She watched as the man made his way to a small booth near the back, moving carefully like someone trying to take up as little space as possible. He slid into the seat and stared at the menu with an intensity that seemed almost painful. Sandra walked past, deliberately avoiding eye contact with the new arrival. The other waitresses did the same, each finding something urgent to do in the opposite direction. The message was clear, nobody was going to serve him. Emma looked at the man sitting alone in that booth, and she saw herself 4 years ago, walking into this very diner with nothing but desperation and hope. She remembered how Rosie had looked at her, really looked at her, and had seen a person instead of a problem. Her feet were moving before she had consciously decided anything, carrying her across the checkered floor toward the booth where the stranger sat, still studying the menu like it held the secrets of the universe. "Hi there," Emma said, her voice warm and genuine. "Welcome to Rosie's. I'm Emma. Can I start you off with something to drink?" The man looked up at her, and Emma was struck by his eyes. They were blue, startlingly so, and despite the weariness that seemed to weigh on him, there was something sharp and observant in his gaze. He studied her for a moment, as if surprised that anyone had spoken to him at all. "Just water, please," he said quietly. His voice was soft, almost apologetic. "And could I see the menu for a minute?" "Take all the time you need," Emma said with a smile. "And our soup of the day is homemade chicken noodle, if you're interested. Marcus makes it fresh every morning." She could feel Victoria's eyes boring into her back from across the room. She could sense Sandra's worried glance from the counter. But Emma had made her choice, and she wasn't going to abandon it now. When she returned with his water, she noticed his hands trembling slightly as he held the menu. He was looking at the prices, she realized, adding them up in his head with the careful calculation of someone who counted every penny. "I'll have the soup," he finally said, setting down the menu. "Just the soup," Emma nodded, writing it down even though she wouldn't forget. Coming right up. As she walked toward the kitchen, she felt the weight of Victoria's disapproval following her like a shadow. But she also felt something else, something she hadn't felt in a long time. The quiet certainty that she was doing exactly what she was supposed to do. She had no way of knowing that this simple act of kindness, this small rebellion against cold corporate policy, was about to change everything. The stranger in the worn green jacket watched her go, and something flickered in those observant blue eyes, something that looked almost like hope. Marcus ladled the soup into a bowl with extra care, as if he somehow sensed that this particular order mattered. He added an extra portion of chicken without being asked, then slid the bowl onto the warming shelf with a nod toward Emma. "Table for the quiet fella in the back?" he asked, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Emma nodded, grateful that Marcus understood without needing explanation. He had always been that way, reading people like others read newspapers, finding the story beneath the surface. "Threw in some extra crackers too," Marcus added, sliding a small basket alongside the soup. "Man looks like he could use a good meal." "Thank you, Marcus. Don't thank me yet." His dark eyes flickered toward Victoria's corner booth. "Just be careful, Emma. That woman's been watching you like a hawk watches a field mouse." Emma carried the soup across the diner, feeling the weight of multiple gazes upon her. The regulars had noticed what was happening. Harold and Betty exchanged meaningful looks over their coffee cups. A young mother with 2 children in the booth by the window paused mid-sentence, her eyes following Emma's path. Even Tommy, usually oblivious to everything except his earbuds and dishwater, had stopped wiping tables to watch. The stranger looked up as Emma approached, and again she was struck by the intensity of those blue eyes. There was intelligence there, she realized, sharp and keen despite the weariness that seemed to cling to him like morning fog. "Here you go," Emma said, setting down the soup with a warm smile. "Marcus's famous chicken noodle, best cure for whatever ails you." The man stared at the bowl for a long moment, and Emma noticed his jaw tighten slightly. When he looked up at her, there was something raw in his expression, something vulnerable that he quickly tried to hide. "This is more than I ordered. Marcus has a heavy hand with the ladle. Consider it a welcome to Rosie's." Emma pulled out her order pad, pretending to check something. "Can I get you anything else? More water, some coffee?" "No, this is—" He paused, seeming to struggle with words. "This is more than enough. Thank you." There was a weight to his gratitude that went beyond simple politeness. Emma had heard thousands of thank yous in her years of waitressing, but this one landed differently. This one felt like it meant something. "You just let me know if you need anything," she said, then moved to check on her other tables, trying to ignore the prickle of Victoria's stare burning into her back. For the next 20 minutes, Emma went about her duties while keeping one eye on the stranger's booth. He ate slowly, savoring each spoonful as if it were a luxury rather than a simple bowl of soup. Between bites, he would pause and look around the diner, observing everything with those watchful eyes. The way the sunlight played across the counter, the easy banter between Marcus and the customers, the photographs on the walls showing Rosie's through the decades. Once his gaze met Emma's across the room, and he offered a small, almost shy smile before quickly looking away. There was something endearing about that shyness, something that didn't quite match his rugged appearance. Victoria chose that moment to strike. She appeared at Emma's elbow like a shadow, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "I need to speak with you, now, in the back." Emma's stomach dropped, but she kept her expression neutral. "I'm in the middle of my section, Ms. Ashford. Can it wait until—" "No." It cannot wait. The other waitresses had frozen in place. Sandra's face had gone pale. Even the customers seemed to sense that something was wrong, conversations dying away into uncomfortable silence. Emma followed Victoria into the small hallway between the kitchen and the storage room, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. Victoria turned to face her, clipboard clutched against her chest like armor. "I gave you a direct instruction regarding that person in the back booth, did I not? You suggested I not serve him. I chose to do my job instead." Victoria's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Your job is to follow company policy and the directives of your supervisor. Your job is not to waste resources on customers who don't contribute to our bottom line." "He's a human being," Emma said, hearing her own voice shake slightly. "He walked through our door hungry. I served him food. That's what a diner does. That's what a charity does. This is a business." Victoria took a step closer, her perfume overwhelming in the confined space. "Do you know what I see when I look at you, Emma? I see someone who thinks she's special. Someone who thinks the rules don't apply to her, because she bats her eyes and plays the sweet small-town girl. That's not... I'm not finished." Victoria's voice had dropped to something almost intimate, which somehow made it more frightening. "I've dealt with employees like you before. You think your little acts of rebellion are noble. You think you're the hero of your own story. But here's the truth. You're replaceable. Everyone is replaceable." Emma felt tears prickling at her eyes but refused to let them fall. "I've worked here for 4 years. I've never been late, never called in sick, never had a single customer complaint. And yet here you are, directly defying my instructions in front of the entire restaurant." Victoria smiled, but it was the smile of someone who had already won. "Tell me, Emma, how much did that soup cost?" "What?" "The soup, the extra portion, the crackers. How much?" Emma's blood ran cold. $4.50. "And how exactly is that customer going to pay for it? Did you see him counting coins when he looked at the menu? Did you notice the patches on his jacket, the mud on his boots?" Victoria leaned in closer. "He can't afford it. You knew he couldn't afford it, which means you either planned to comp it without authorization, or you planned to pay for it yourself, both of which are violations of company policy." The silence that followed was suffocating. Emma could hear her own heartbeat, could hear the distant clatter of dishes in the kitchen, could hear the muffled murmur of customers wondering what was happening. "I was going to pay for it myself," Emma finally admitted, "out of my tips, using company resources to subsidize your personal charity project." Victoria's smile widened. "That's theft, Emma. It's $4.50. It's the principle. If I let you get away with this, what's next? Free meals for every stray that wanders in? Discounts for anyone with a sad story?" Victoria shook her head slowly. "I have to make an example, you understand." The words hit Emma like a physical blow. "You can't be serious." "I'm always serious about protecting company interests." Victoria straightened her blazer, smoothing invisible wrinkles. "You're terminated, effective immediately." "Please." The word escaped before Emma could stop it, raw and desperate. "Please, I need this job. I have a daughter. My mother is sick. I'm 1 semester away from finishing nursing school. Please don't do this." For just a moment, something flickered in Victoria's eyes. It might have been hesitation. It might have been the faintest ghost of human empathy. But whatever it was, it disappeared as quickly as it came, replaced by cold determination. "You should have thought about that before you decided to play Mother Teresa with company resources." Victoria gestured toward the dining room. "Collect your things. I want you out in 5 minutes. At least let me finish my shift. Let me say goodbye to..." "5 minutes, Emma, and I'll be watching. And I'll be..." Victoria strode back into the dining room, leaving Emma standing alone in the hallway with her world crumbling around her. For a long moment, she couldn't move, couldn't breathe. 4 years of early mornings and late nights, 4 years of aching feet and forced smiles, 4 years of dreaming about a better future, and it was all gone because she had given a stranger a bowl of soup. When Emma finally emerged from the hallway, she felt like she was walking through water. Everything seemed distant, muffled, unreal. She was vaguely aware of faces turning toward her, of Sandra's sharp intake of breath, of Marcus appearing in the kitchen doorway with thunderclouds in his eyes. Victoria had positioned herself in the center of the dining room, making sure everyone had a clear view of what was about to happen. "Ladies and gentlemen," Victoria announced, her voice carrying to every corner of the diner, "I apologize for any disruption, but I need to address a personnel matter." The customers fell silent. Harold and Betty looked stricken. The young mother pulled her children closer. And in the back booth, the stranger in the green jacket had gone completely still, his soup forgotten. "Emma Caldwell is no longer employed by this establishment," Victoria continued, each word landing like a hammer blow. "She has been terminated for theft of company resources and insubordination. I want to assure all of you that this behavior does not reflect our values at Rosie's Diner." A murmur rippled through the restaurant. Some customers looked uncomfortable, others looked angry, but nobody spoke up. Nobody challenged Victoria's version of events. Emma felt something break inside her. Not just her pride, though that was certainly shattered. Something deeper. The belief, perhaps, that doing the right thing would eventually be rewarded. The hope that kindness mattered in a world that seemed increasingly determined to prove otherwise. "Emma, your personal belongings." Victoria gestured toward the break room with a dismissive wave. "Quickly, please. You're disrupting service." Emma walked toward the break room on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. She passed Sandra, who grabbed her hand and squeezed it hard, tears streaming down her cheeks. She passed Marcus, who looked like he wanted to throw his spatula at Victoria's head. She passed Tommy, who for once had removed his earbuds and was staring with an expression of pure shock. In the break room she gathered her things with numb fingers, her spare apron, the photograph of Lily she kept in her locker, the nursing textbook she studied during breaks, the coffee mug Lily had painted for her last Mother's Day, slightly crooked letters spelling out, "World's Best Mom." World's Best Mom. What kind of mother gets fired for being too kind? When she emerged, Victoria was waiting by the front door, holding it open like a prison guard releasing an inmate. "Your final paycheck will be mailed," Victoria said, not even looking at Emma as she passed. "Don't expect a reference." Emma stepped out into the afternoon sunlight, and the door swung shut behind her, with a sound of terrible finality. She stood there on the sidewalk, clutching her box of belongings, feeling the stares of passers-by who wondered why a waitress was standing outside a diner in the middle of a shift, looking like her entire world had just ended. Because it had. It had ended over a bowl of soup and the radical act of treating a stranger like a human being. She didn't know how long she stood there. Long enough for the sun to shift. Long enough for her tears to dry on her cheeks. Long enough for the reality of her situation to fully sink in. No job, no income. Rent due in 2 weeks. Her mother's medication running low. Lily's preschool fees. The nursing school tuition payment coming up next month. She had been so close, so impossibly close to breaking free of this cycle of poverty and struggle. And now, because of $4.50 worth of soup, it was all slipping away. Emma started walking, not sure where she was going, just knowing that she couldn't stand in front of that diner for another second. Her feet carried her automatically toward home, toward the small apartment where her mother would be waiting with Lily, where she would have to explain that everything had changed. She never noticed the man in the green jacket, who had slipped out the back door of the diner seconds after her departure. She never saw him standing in the shadows across the street, watching her walk away with something burning in those blue eyes. Something that looked a lot like rage, and something that looked a lot like a plan. The apartment building where Emma lived had seen better decades. The paint was peeling. The elevator had been broken since before she moved in, and the hallway always smelled faintly of cabbage and regret. But it was home. It was the place where Lily had taken her first steps, where Ruth hummed old hymns while cooking dinner, where Emma had spent countless nights studying at the kitchen table, with a cold cup of coffee and a heart full of determination. Now climbing those 4 flights of stairs felt like scaling a mountain with no peak in sight. She paused outside apartment 4B, clutching her box of belongings, trying to compose herself before facing her family. She could hear Lily's laughter through the thin door, bright and innocent and utterly unaware that their world had just shifted on its axis. How do you tell a 5-year-old that mommy lost her job? How do you explain that sometimes the world punishes you for being kind? Emma took a deep breath, fixed a smile on her face that felt like wearing a mask made of broken glass, and opened the door. "Mommy?" Lily launched herself across the small living room like a tiny missile, wrapping her arms around Emma's legs with the fierce determination of a child who believes hugs can fix anything. Her dark curls bounced as she looked up with eyes that were exact copies of Emma's own. "You're home early. Grandma said you wouldn't be home until after my bedtime." Emma set down her box and knelt to gather her daughter in her arms, breathing in the sweet scent of children's shampoo and innocence. "I got off early today, baby girl." Surprise. Ruth appeared in the kitchen doorway, wiping her hands on a dish towel. At 54, she carried herself with the quiet dignity of a woman who had weathered many storms. But the storms had taken their toll. Her skin had a greyish pallor that worried Emma constantly, and she moved with the careful deliberation of someone managing chronic pain. Their eyes met over Lily's head, and Ruth's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Mothers always knew. Even before a word was spoken, Ruth could see the devastation hiding behind Emma's brittle smile. "Lily, sweetheart," Ruth said, her voice carefully casual, "why don't you go finish your drawing? I want to see what color you're going to make the dragon's wings." "Purple," Lily announced, releasing Emma and bouncing toward the coffee table where crayons and paper awaited. "Purple with sparkles. That sounds beautiful, baby." Emma watched her daughter settle onto the carpet, already absorbed in her artwork, living in that blessed space where biggest concerns were crayon colors and dragon wings. Ruth gestured toward the kitchen with a subtle tilt of her head. Emma followed, each step feeling heavier than the last. The kitchen was tiny, barely room for two people to stand without bumping elbows, but it had always been Ruth's domain. Even now, with her health failing and her energy limited, she insisted on cooking dinner every night. It was her way of contributing, of proving that she wasn't just a burden. "Tell me," Ruth said simply, leaning against the counter. Emma opened her mouth to explain, to soften the blow, to find some way to make this sound less catastrophic than it was. Instead, the tears she had been holding back finally broke free, and she crumpled against her mother like a child seeking shelter from a storm. Ruth held her, stroking her hair, making soft, soothing sounds that hadn't changed since Emma was Lily's age. She didn't ask questions. She just held on, providing an anchor in the chaos. "I got fired," Emma finally managed, the words muffled against Ruth's shoulder. "For giving a man a bowl of soup, for being kind to someone everyone else was ignoring." "Oh, sweetheart." "The new manager, Victoria, she made an example of me. In front of everyone, she called it theft because I was going to pay for his meal myself." Emma pulled back, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. $4.50, Mom. I lost everything over $4.50. Ruth's eyes hardened with a protective fury that reminded Emma of a lioness. "That woman sounds like she has a hole where her heart should be. She has a business degree and a corner office. Close enough." Emma laughed bitterly, then the reality crashed over her again. "Mom, what am I going to do? The rent is due in 2 weeks. Your medication needs to be refilled. Lily's preschool, my tuition, the electric bill." She pressed her palms against her eyes, trying to push back the panic. "I was so close, 1 more semester. Just 1 more semester, and I would have had my nursing degree, and I could have gotten a real job with real benefits, and I could have finally taken care of us properly." "You take care of us just fine," Ruth said firmly. "You've been taking care of this family since you were 19 years old. You work harder than anyone I've ever known. And look where it got me. Fired for being too nice." Ruth took Emma's face in her hands, forcing eye contact. Her fingers were cool and slightly trembling, a reminder of the illness that was slowly claiming her strength. "Now you listen to me, Emma Rose Caldwell. What you did today was right. You treated a human being with dignity when everyone else was treating him like garbage. That's not weakness. That's not foolishness. That's strength of character, and don't you dare let anyone make you feel ashamed of it. But the bills will get paid somehow. They always do." Ruth smiled, though worry lurked behind her eyes. "The Lord hasn't brought us this far to abandon us now." Emma wished she had her mother's faith. Once upon a time she had believed that the universe rewarded good people, that working hard and being kind would eventually lead to a better life. But the universe had taken her father when she was 12, had given her a husband who abandoned his family, had saddled her mother with an illness they couldn't afford to treat, and now had punished her for the crime of compassion. If there was a cosmic plan, Emma was starting to suspect it had been drafted by someone with a cruel sense of humor. "Mommy." Lily appeared in the kitchen doorway, her purple crayon clutched in one hand and a worried expression on her small face. "Why are you crying?" Emma quickly wiped her cheeks and summoned a smile. "Just happy tears, baby. Sometimes grown-ups cry when they're happy." Lily considered this with the solemn intensity of a philosopher examining a difficult theorem. "That's silly," she finally declared. "When I'm happy, I laugh. Crying is for sad." "You're absolutely right." Emma scooped up her daughter, pressing kisses against her cheeks until Lily dissolved into giggles. No more crying, only laughing. How's that dragon coming along? He needs more purple. And a name. What should I name him? Emma carried Lily back to the living room, grateful for the distraction. What about Sir Purple Wings the Magnificent? That's too long. What about just Sparkle? Sparkle is perfect. They spent the next hour on the floor together, coloring dragons and castles and princesses who rescued themselves from towers. Ruth joined them after finishing dinner preparations, her movement slow but her smile genuine. For that brief window of time, Emma allowed herself to forget about bills and jobs and uncertain futures, but reality has a way of refusing to stay forgotten. After Lily was bathed, storied and tucked into the bed she shared with Emma, the two women sat at the kitchen table with cups of tea neither of them really wanted. The apartment felt smaller in the evening darkness, the walls pressing in with the weight of all the problems they couldn't solve. "I'll start looking for a new job tomorrow," Emma said, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. "Maybe the grocery store is hiring, or I could try the nursing home over on Oak Street. They're always short-staffed." "What about school?" Emma stared into her tea. "I might have to take a semester off. I can't afford tuition without the diner income." "Emma, no." Ruth leaned forward, her expression fierce despite her frailty. "You are too close to give up now. We'll find another way." "There isn't another way, Mom. I've been doing the math in my head all evening. Even if I find a new job by next week, I won't have enough saved for tuition by the payment deadline." She felt the tears threatening again, but forced them back. "Maybe it's a sign. Maybe I was never supposed to—" "Don't you dare finish that sentence." Ruth's voice cracked like a whip. "You were born to be a nurse. I've watched you care for me, care for Lily, care for complete strangers with a patience and compassion that most people can't even imagine. You are going to finish that degree if I have to sell everything we own to make it happen." "Mom, I mean it, Emma. I'm not going to let one heartless woman destroy your future." The fierceness in her mother's eyes made Emma's heart ache with love and guilt in equal measure. Ruth would absolutely sell everything she owned. She would work herself into an early grave if she thought it would help her daughter. And Emma would rather fail 1,000 times than let that happen. "We should get some sleep," Emma said softly, reaching across the table to squeeze her mother's hand. "Things always look different in the morning." "That's what my mother used to say." Ruth smiled sadly. "Usually right before things got worse." "Mom, sorry. Gallows humor. It's a coping mechanism." Ruth rose slowly from the table, wincing at some unseen pain. "Tomorrow we'll make a plan. Tonight we rest, and we trust that somehow, some way, things will work out." Emma helped her mother to the small bedroom off the living room, the only private space in the apartment. Ruth had insisted Emma and Lily take the larger room, claiming she preferred the coziness of the smaller one. Emma knew the truth was that Ruth wanted her granddaughter to have a proper bedroom, even if it meant she slept in what was essentially a glorified closet. After ensuring Ruth was settled with her medications and a glass of water within reach, Emma returned to her own room. Lily was already deeply asleep, her small body curled around a stuffed elephant named Mr. Trumpet. Her lips slightly parted, her breath soft and regular. Emma changed into her pajamas and slid into bed beside her daughter, pulling the worn quilt up to their chins. In sleep, Lily instinctively moved closer, her small hand finding Emma's and holding on. The ceiling had a water stain in the corner that had been there since they moved in. Emma had stared at it countless nights, watching it grow slightly larger after each rain, a physical reminder of all the things she couldn't afford to fix. Tonight, it seemed to mock her, a symbol of everything falling apart that she was powerless to stop. But as she lay there in the darkness, her daughter's warmth beside her and her mother's faith echoing in her ears, something shifted in Emma's chest. Not hope exactly. Something more like defiance. She had survived an absent father. She had survived an abandoning husband. She had survived 4 years of impossible schedules and relentless exhaustion. She would survive this too. Victoria Ashford could take her job, but she couldn't take her spirit. Tomorrow, Emma would start over. She would pound the pavement until her feet bled if necessary. She would find a way to finish school, to pay the bills, to give Lily the future she deserved. What Emma couldn't know, as she finally drifted into an exhausted sleep, was that tomorrow would bring something she never could have anticipated. The stranger from the diner hadn't forgotten her, and he was about to change everything. The next morning arrived grey and overcast, the sky heavy with clouds that mirrored Emma's mood. She had barely slept, her mind racing through calculations until exhaustion finally pulled her under sometime around 3 in the morning. Lily woke at her usual time, cheerful and oblivious, demanding pancakes with the absolute certainty of a child who doesn't yet understand that some mornings pancakes aren't possible. Emma made them anyway, using the last of the eggs and the flour that was meant to last another week. Some battles weren't worth fighting. "Are you going to work today, Mummy?" Lily asked through a mouthful of pancake, syrup dripping down her chin. "Not today, sweetheart. Mommy has the day off. Can we go to the park? Maybe later. I have some things I need to do first." The things consisted of updating her resume on the ancient laptop, scrolling through job listings that required experience she didn't have or offered wages that wouldn't cover daycare, and trying not to cry in front of her daughter. Ruth emerged from her room around 10, moving slower than usual, her face pinched with pain she never complained about. She took one look at Emma hunched over the laptop and wordlessly started making tea, her way of offering comfort without intrusion. By noon, Emma had applied to 7 positions: a cashier at the grocery store, a receptionist at a dental office, a night stalker at the big box store on the edge of town. Each application felt like a step backward, a retreat from the future she had been building toward. But pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. She was drafting an 8th application when her phone buzzed with a text from Sandra. "You need to come to the diner, right now. Something is happening. I can't explain. Just come." Emma stared at the message, her heart rate spiking. Had Victoria accused her of something else? Was there some legal issue she hadn't anticipated? The last place on earth she wanted to go was back to Rosie's diner, but Sandra wasn't the type to send dramatic texts without reason. "Mom, can you watch Lily for an hour? I need to run out." Ruth looked up from where she was helping Lily assemble a puzzle on the coffee table. "Everything okay?" "I don't know. Sandra needs me at the diner." Something flickered in Ruth's eyes, a mother's intuition sensing this moment mattered somehow. "Go. We'll be fine." The bus ride to Rosie's felt eternal. Emma watched the familiar streets pass by through grimy windows, wondering what fresh disaster awaited her. Maybe Victoria had decided to press actual charges. Maybe the other employees were being punished for association. Maybe the diner itself had burned down, and Sandra wanted her to witness the ashes. Nothing could have prepared her for what she actually found. The parking lot was packed, unusual for a Tuesday afternoon. Several unfamiliar cars lined the street, including a sleek black sedan that probably cost more than her entire apartment building. A small crowd had gathered on the sidewalk, craning to peer through the windows. Emma pushed through the crowd, her confusion mounting with each step. Through the glass she could see that the diner was full, but nobody seemed to be eating. Everyone was standing, their attention focused on something happening near the center of the room. She pushed open the door and the bell chimed, with the same cheerful sound it always made, utterly incongruous with the charged atmosphere inside. The first thing she saw was Victoria, standing rigid beside the counter, her face the color of old milk. Gone was the imperious confidence of yesterday. She looked like a woman watching her own execution. The second thing she saw was the man from the booth. But he wasn't the same man, not really. Gone were the shabby jacket and worn boots. Gone was the stubble and the unkempt hair. In their place stood someone who looked like he had stepped out of a magazine advertisement for expensive watches. He wore a tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than Emma made in 6 months. His hair was professionally styled, his jaw clean-shaven, his posture radiating authority and power, but his eyes were the same. Those startlingly blue eyes that had studied her with such intensity when she served him soup. Those eyes now held something that made Emma's breath catch in her throat. Standing behind him were 3 people in business attire, 2 men and a woman, carrying briefcases and tablets and expressions of professional neutrality. "Emma!" Sandra rushed toward her, grabbing her arm and pulling her inside. "You're not going to believe this. I still don't believe it, and I've been watching for 20 minutes. Sandra, what's happening? Who is that?" Before Sandra could answer, the man in the suit turned. His eyes found Emma across the crowded diner, and something shifted in his expression. The hard authority softened, replaced by something almost like relief. "Ms. Caldwell," he said, his voice carrying easily across the room. "Thank you for coming. Please join us." Every head in the diner swiveled toward Emma. She felt the weight of dozens of stares, the curiosity and confusion of customers and staff alike. Her legs felt like they might give out, but somehow she walked forward, stopping a few feet away from the man who was clearly no longer a stranger in need of soup. "I don't understand," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know, and I apologize for the deception." He turned slightly, addressing not just Emma but the entire room. "My name is Daniel Wright. I am the founder and majority owner of Comfort Foods Corporation." The silence that followed was so complete that Emma could hear the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. "That's impossible," Victoria blurted, her voice cracking. "I would know if the owner was visiting. There would have been protocols. There would have been performance." Daniel cut her off, his tone sharp as a blade. "Which is exactly what I was trying to avoid." He pulled a document from one of his associates' briefcases and held it up. "For the past 6 months, I've been visiting locations throughout our chain, unannounced and unrecognized. I wanted to see how our employees actually behave when they think nobody important is watching." He began to pace slowly, his expensive shoes silent on the checkered floor that had witnessed so much history. "I've seen managers who create welcoming environments and managers who create toxic ones. I've seen servers who treat every customer with dignity and servers who judge people by their appearance. I've seen the full spectrum of human behavior, both beautiful and ugly." He stopped in front of Victoria, who seemed to shrink under his gaze. "Yesterday, I walked into this establishment dressed as someone who appeared to need help. I wanted to see what would happen." His voice grew colder with each word. "What happened was that you, Miss Ashford, instructed your staff to ignore me. You called me unworthy of service. You deemed me not the kind of customer you wanted." Victoria's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "I was protecting profit margins. The company policy is to treat every customer with respect and dignity, regardless of their appearance or perceived economic status. That policy exists because I wrote it, Miss Ashford, because I grew up poor, because I remember what it felt like to be looked at, the way you looked at me yesterday." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Harold and Betty had made their way to the front, clutching each other's hands, their eyes wide. Marcus stood in the kitchen doorway, his massive arms crossed over his chest, a slow smile spreading across his face. Sandra had tears streaming down her cheeks. Daniel turned away from Victoria and looked directly at Emma. And then something remarkable happened. One person, despite direct orders to the contrary, despite the risk to her own livelihood, chose to see me as a human being. She served me with warmth and kindness. She recommended the soup. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. It was excellent soup, by the way. Emma felt her cheeks flush. This couldn't be real. This had to be some elaborate dream her exhausted brain had conjured. When I couldn't afford my meal, she planned to pay for it herself, out of her own tips, money she desperately needed for her own family. Daniel's voice grew heavy with emotion. And for this act of extraordinary compassion, she was publicly humiliated and terminated. He turned back to Victoria, and all warmth vanished from his expression. "Ms. Ashford, you are relieved of your position with Comfort Foods Corporation, effective immediately. Security will escort you to collect your personal belongings. Your final paycheck will be mailed, and I strongly suggest you don't expect a reference." Victoria's face contorted through several emotions: shock, rage, desperation, before settling on something like pleading. "Mr. Wright, please. I was just doing my job. I was trying to maximize profits, to meet the targets that corporate set. Corporate didn't set targets that required treating human beings like garbage." Daniel nodded to one of his associates, who stepped forward with quiet authority. "Please escort Ms. Ashford out." As Victoria was led toward the door, she passed Emma and their eyes met. For just a moment, Emma saw something beneath the woman's cold exterior: fear, desperation, the terror of someone whose carefully constructed world was crumbling. Despite everything, Emma felt a flicker of something that might have been pity. But then Victoria was gone, the door swinging shut behind her, and Daniel was turning back to Emma with an expression that made her heart stutter. "Ms. Caldwell, I owe you an apology. My test caused you to lose your job, and that was never my intention. I simply wanted to see who on the staff had genuine character." He paused, seeming to struggle with words for the first time since this surreal scene began. "I found something far more valuable. I found someone who reminded me why I started this company in the first place. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything yet, but I hope you'll consider what I'm about to offer." Daniel straightened his shoulders, shifting back into business mode. "First, I want to reinstate you at your previous position, with back pay for the time lost. Second, I want to promote you to assistant manager of this location with a corresponding increase in salary. Emma's head was spinning. Assistant manager. After 4 years of carrying plates and forcing smiles and dreaming of something better. But that's not all, Daniel continued. I understand you're 1 semester away from completing your nursing degree. I would like to personally fund your remaining tuition, as well as establish a scholarship in your name for other employees seeking to further their education. The diner erupted. People were cheering, clapping, some crying openly. Sandra grabbed Emma in a hug so tight she could barely breathe. Marcus was laughing, a booming sound that shook the walls. Even Harold and Betty were on their feet, applauding like they were at a standing ovation. Through it all, Emma stood frozen, unable to process what was happening. This morning, she had been applying for minimum wage jobs, resigned to watching her dreams slip away. Now she was being offered everything she had worked so hard for, handed to her by a man she had served soup to yesterday. Why? She finally managed to ask. Why would you do all this? Daniel's expression softened, and for a moment, he looked less like a corporate titan, and more like the tired stranger she had met in that back booth. Because my mother was a waitress, he said quietly. She worked in diners like this one for 30 years, and not once did anyone ever see her as anything more than the woman who brought their coffee. She died believing she had never made a difference in the world. His voice caught slightly. She was wrong. She made a difference to me. And yesterday you made a difference too. You reminded me that kindness still exists, even when it's punished. That some people will do the right thing simply because it's right. Emma felt tears sliding down her cheeks, but she made no move to wipe them away. So please, Daniel said, extending his hand toward her, let me do the right thing too. Emma looked at Daniel's outstretched hand, at the hope in his eyes that seemed so at odds with the powerful businessman who had just dismantled Victoria's career with surgical precision. Around them, the diner had gone quiet again, everyone holding their breath, waiting to see what she would do. She thought about her mother at home, counting pills and pretending she wasn't in pain. She thought about Lily, coloring dragons with purple wings, dreaming dreams that cost money they didn't have. She thought about the water stain on her ceiling, growing larger with every rain, a symbol of everything she couldn't fix. And she thought about yesterday, standing in this very diner, choosing to see a human being when everyone else saw a problem. Mr. Wright, she said slowly, I'm grateful for your offer. More grateful than you could possibly know, but I need you to understand something. Daniel's expression flickered with uncertainty. Of course, I didn't serve you because I wanted something in return. I served you because it was the right thing to do, because my grandmother used to say that we're all just walking each other home, and sometimes that means sharing soup with a stranger. Emma's voice grew stronger as she spoke. If I accept your offer, I need you to know that I'm not accepting it as a reward. I'm accepting it as an opportunity to keep doing what I've always tried to do, which is to treat people with dignity. Daniel's smile was like sunrise breaking through clouds. Ms. Caldwell, that's exactly why I want you on my team. She took his hand. The diner erupted again, but this time Emma barely heard it. She was too busy processing the fact that her life had just changed irrevocably, that the despair of yesterday morning had somehow transformed into possibility. Sandra was crying and laughing at the same time, pulling Emma into another crushing hug. Marcus had abandoned the kitchen entirely, lifting Emma off her feet in a bear hug that made her ribs creak. Harold and Betty were both wiping their eyes, and even some of the customers she didn't know were applauding. Through it all, Daniel stood back slightly, watching with an expression that seemed almost wistful. When the chaos finally died down, he approached Emma again. There's one more thing, he said quietly, for her ears only. I did some research last night. Your mother's condition, the treatment she needs isn't covered by standard insurance, but it's available at a specialist center in Boston. Emma's heart stopped. How do you know about my mother? I make it my business to understand the people I want to work with. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. The treatment costs approximately $40,000. I'd like to cover it, if you'll allow me. I can't accept that. It's too much. It's exactly enough. Daniel's eyes held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. My mother died of a treatable illness because we couldn't afford the care she needed. I was 19 years old, and I swore that if I ever had the means, I would never let another family go through what we did. His voice roughened. Please, Emma, let me keep that promise. She thought about Ruth, moving slowly through the apartment, hiding her pain behind forced smiles. She thought about the fear that lived in her chest every time her mother's cough got worse, the terror of losing the only parent she had left. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." The weeks that followed felt like living inside a whirlwind. True to his word, Daniel arranged everything with speed and efficiency that left Emma breathless. Ruth was seen by specialists within days, and the treatment plan offered real hope for the first time in years. Watching her mother's face when the doctor explained that her condition was manageable, that she could have years of quality life ahead, was something Emma would carry in her heart forever. The promotion at Rosie's came with challenges Emma hadn't anticipated. Some of the staff resented her sudden elevation, whispering that she had only gotten ahead because she was lucky, because she had stumbled into the right place at the right time. But slowly, through patience and hard work, and the same genuine kindness that had caught Daniel's attention in the first place, she won them over. Sandra became her unofficial advisor, helping her navigate the complexities of scheduling and inventory, and the thousand small crises that made up restaurant management. Marcus remained her staunchest supporter, always ready with a cup of coffee and a word of encouragement when the days grew long. And then there was nursing school. Walking into her first class as a fully funded student, knowing that she no longer had to choose between textbooks and groceries, felt like stepping into a dream. She attacked her studies with renewed vigor, earning top marks in courses that had once seemed impossible. Her professors noticed her dedication, and one of them, a veteran nurse named Dr. Patricia Okonkwo, took her under her wing. "So you have something special," Dr. Okonkwo told her one evening, after a particularly grueling clinical rotation. "A gift for making people feel seen. Don't ever lose that." Emma carried those words like a talisman. The scholarship program Daniel had established in her name brought its own unexpected rewards. Within months, 3 other Rosie's employees had enrolled in educational programs, their tuition covered by the Emma Caldwell Opportunity Fund. Watching Tommy, the young dishwasher who had always seemed so aimless, light up when he received his acceptance letter to community college was a joy Emma hadn't known she needed. Daniel visited the diner occasionally, always unannounced, always dressed casually enough to blend in. He would sit in his old booth in the back corner, order Marcus's soup, and observe the business he had built. Sometimes he and Emma would talk during her breaks, sharing stories about their families, their dreams, their fears. She learned that his success had come at a price. A failed marriage to a woman who couldn't understand why he spent more time in struggling diners than in boardrooms. Estrangement from a brother who accused him of abandoning their roots. Loneliness that all the money in the world couldn't cure. "I built an empire," he told her once, "but I forgot to build a life. You're the first person in years who's made me feel like maybe it's not too late to fix that." Emma didn't know what to say to that, so she simply sat with him in comfortable silence. 2 people who had found unexpected connection in the most unlikely of places. Graduation day arrived on a perfect spring morning, the kind of day designed for new beginnings. Emma walked across the stage in her cap and gown, her nursing pin gleaming, while her family cheered from the audience. Ruth was there, healthy and strong, her treatments having exceeded all expectations. Lily was there, now 6 years old, bouncing in her seat with excitement she couldn't contain. Sandra and Marcus had closed the diner for the afternoon to attend, a gesture that had made Emma cry when she found out. Even Harold and Betty had come, insisting that they wouldn't miss this moment for the world. And Daniel was there, sitting quietly in the back row, applauding with an expression of pride that made Emma's heart swell. Afterward, at the small party Ruth had insisted on throwing despite Emma's protests, the apartment felt fuller than it ever had. Neighbors dropped by with casseroles and congratulations. Co-workers brought flowers and cards. Lily ran circles around everyone, high on cake and attention, her laughter filling every corner. At one point, Emma found herself alone on the tiny balcony, looking out at the city that had been backdrop to both her struggles and triumphs. The water stain on her ceiling had finally been fixed, along with a dozen other problems that had seemed insurmountable months ago. But standing here now, she realized those physical repairs were the smallest part of what had changed. Ruth joined her, moving slowly but steadily, no longer hiding her pain because there was so much less of it now. "I'm proud of you," Ruth said simply, taking her daughter's hand. "I couldn't have done it without you, Mom, without you believing in me even when I didn't believe in myself. That's what mothers do." Ruth smiled, her eyes glistening. But Emma, I want you to know something. What happened to you, the good fortune that came from that day in the diner, it wasn't luck. It was character. What do you mean? I mean that you spent years building the kind of heart that would choose kindness over safety, compassion over self-interest. When your moment came, you were ready for it. Not because you were hoping for a reward, but because you couldn't imagine being any other way. Ruth squeezed her hand. That's not luck, sweetheart. That's who you are. Emma thought about her grandmother's words, about walking each other home. She thought about old Rosie, who had given her a chance when she had nothing. She thought about Daniel's mother, working in diners for 30 years, never knowing the difference she made. Maybe that was the real lesson. Not that kindness gets rewarded, because often it doesn't. Not that good things happen to good people, because the world was far too complicated for such simple equations. But that kindness matters anyway. That choosing to see the humanity in others, especially when it costs us something, is never wasted. Because you never know who's watching. You never know whose life you might change. And even if nobody ever sees, even if there's no reward waiting around the corner, being kind makes you the kind of person you can be proud of when you look in the mirror. That was worth more than any promotion, any scholarship, any amount of money. The party wound down as evening settled over the city. Guests departed with hugs and promises to keep in touch. Lily finally crashed on the couch, exhausted from the excitement. Mr. Trumpet clutched to her chest. Emma walked Daniel to the door, grateful for his presence, even as she struggled to find words adequate to express it. "Thank you," she said finally, "for everything, for seeing me when you could have just seen a waitress, for giving me the chance to become who I was meant to be." Daniel smiled, and there was something different in his expression now. Something that had grown over the months of conversations and shared stories and quiet moments in a diner booth. "You were already who you were meant to be, Emma. I just helped clear away some of the obstacles." He paused at the threshold, turning back to look at her. "You know, my mother used to say that the measure of a person isn't what they do when people are watching. It's what they do when they think nobody will ever know." She sounds like she was a wise woman. She was, and I think she would have loved you. After he left, Emma returned to the living room where her mother was gently covering Lily with a blanket. The apartment was quiet now, peaceful in a way that felt earned rather than accidental. "Mom," Emma said softly, "I think I understand now why you always taught me to be kind even when it was hard, even when it didn't seem to matter." Ruth looked up, waiting. "Because it always matters. Not because of what we might get back, but because of what it makes us. Every time we choose kindness, we become more of who we're supposed to be." Ruth's smile was like a blessing. "Now you understand everything important there is to know." Emma knelt beside the couch, brushing a curl from Lily's sleeping face. Her daughter, who would grow up knowing that her mother had faced impossible odds and chosen compassion anyway. Who would learn, not from lectures but from example, that the way we treat the forgotten and the overlooked defines the content of our character. Outside, the city hummed with a million stories unfolding, a million opportunities for kindness that might never be recognized or rewarded. And somewhere out there, someone who looked like nobody important was walking into a place where they would be judged by their appearance, their clothes, their perceived worth. Emma hoped that whoever met them would remember what really mattered. She hoped they would choose the soup,